What's going on, guys? Thanks for coming back to the channel. Time for the next entry, entry 35 in the Diary of a Cinephile. I'm going to talk about the show that's kind of taking over Amazon Prime right now, Them. We just finished it, me and my wife, over the weekend. It's been out for a while now. I want to say maybe a month or so, a couple of weeks. And we've heard some good things. We've been back and forth between a bunch of different shows, our normal, everyday kind of, throw around shows that we play in the background, shows that we're trying to invest in, whether they're new or old and have plenty of seasons, and I'm trying to wait to get to the end till I can talk about them. And this is only the first season of this show, and the premise of it is very unique to an extent where it's not what you think going into it. And what I like is that it's being promoted as an anthology series. So this is kind of what Amazon is doing to, say, compete with American Horror Story. At least that's what I get. And I feel like whatever new season that's going to come up, it's not going to deal with this family that this season's about. It's probably going to deal with a completely different story, which, if they do follow that route, I personally love that idea. It took me a couple of years to get into American Horror Story, and I think it was around the age of Coven when I finally decided, American Horror Story is a show worthwhile, and then I started watching the other seasons, and I think it was up to season 5 by that point, and Coven at that point was also my wife's favorite, and she was just rewatching it, and I started watching it with her, and I was like, how many seasons of this in there? She said 5, and I'm like, which one is this? 3. I'm like, this is not what I remember, and then she was explaining it to me, and American Horror Story is very unique in that sense. So I think that's what Amazon's going for with this show. And if that's the case, whoever the team is behind it, or whoever greenlights it, by all means, keep giving them the reins of making this show. I believe it's done. What's the creator's name again? It's a very unique name. Little Marvin. I had to think about it for a second. Little Marvin. This is, I think, his first kind of hit. I think he's done 1 or 2 other things before, but this show is a trip, dude. This is like one turn after another that it's just, things are unexpected, things come out of nowhere and shock the daylights out of you. It's just, it's hard to express how crazy it can get at times, and how many, I don't think so we binged it over like 3 days. Of course you can probably binge it in one sitting if you wanted to waste an entire Sunday on it, or if you wanted to or if you wanted to just stay in all day on a Saturday. You can definitely get it done in one day. It's not that long. The episodes are not that long. And that's something else I'm going to kind of get into for a second, but I just want to stick on this point where I'm talking about how I don't think I've held my mouth in shock, like when something happens and you go, oh, I don't think I've ever done that as many times in probably the last decade when watching movies or TV shows that I did when watching this show. Every single episode is a just gasp of shock and awe, and it's just done very, very well. The cinematography is outstanding. The directing is outstanding. All the actors and actresses in it, they're great. The lead, Deborah, I'm going to butcher her last name, I'm so sorry. Deborah Ayorinde. She's done a couple of things before, but this is like a real breakout role for her, I would say. There's also Alison Pill, who plays the racist white neighbor. I've loved her for a long time. I loved her in Newsroom. I loved her in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. I think she's a great actress. I'm glad she's in it. I think she does bring a dynamic to the show as well. And like I said, she plays racist white neighbor. So when you go into this, you think it's going to be something along the lines of, say, Us, since it's called Them. You think it's going to be something like Us, or something like maybe Antebellum, or maybe Get Out, where the underlining thing is, say, the bringing forth the idea of the racism in this country. It takes place in the 50s, speaking of which. And it's really just a foreground storyteller. And here's the thing. that story probably could have used that. But then again, if you really took out... Because again, these episodes are short. They're maybe 40 to 45 minutes apiece. There's one that's only 30 minutes. So if you bunched that all together, took out some of the unnecessary things, like a lot of the backstory with this neighbor, Alison Pill, this lady, a lot of her backstory may be unnecessary. A lot of the other things, like there's a whole episode dedicated to the background. So I don't want to explain too much or give too much away. I'm going to stop myself now because I was about to kind of give a little too much away. But again, it's still a good show, and I do see that everything that's been put into it is put in for a reason. Nothing really feels like a filler episode, although there is content that I, again, will say, if you took it out, this probably would have been just as good of a movie. But if they're trying to do an anthology series, I can say this does make sense, and the story points and the plot devices that they put in there aren't too unnecessary. Like, it makes sense to the overall arc. If you took them out, you'd have to change a couple of other things because it wouldn't make sense otherwise. But when you have these story positions in there, it all does make sense. I'm trying to do whatever I can without spoiling too much because it's a wild ride, and it's not just about the idea of a black family moving into a racist white community in the 1950s. That's actually very minor in the story. It plays a role in certain things, but what it really is about, it's about how this family is like breaking down after a tragic accident happened to them, and it just so happens that the house they live in is haunted. And the haunted house is like going after them and breaking them down even more because it's giving them like these illusions and making them believe certain things and kind of like fucking with their minds. And every single one of them, that's the greatest part about it, is that it's not one of these, and I thought it was gonna be, and when we first started it, I looked at my wife and I said, you know what, I'm really over this horror theme, this horror movie and horror TV show trope where there's a couple, one is experiencing the haunting and the other one doesn't believe them. After like the first episode, you kind of get out of that mindset because you're believing that it's just happening to, say, the kid, or it's just happening to the wife. But it's actually happening to all of them. The fucked up thing is none of them are talking about it. None of them are bringing it to anybody else's attention. They're all just kind of dealing with it. And they don't realize that if they just came out and was like, oh, you know what? This is happening to me. And then they get to know, oh, you know what? I'm experiencing something the same way. Maybe we should talk about this and figure out what's going on. Nobody does that. And I think that's even more unique to an extent that it doesn't follow that same trope. It just makes you believe that that trope is there. But really what it is just the concept of humanism. How when we have things that we're dealing with that we think are the only one that's opening about it, of course, is the little girl. So when you have that young mentality that I feel like I should say this, I do see the person standing in the corner. Mommy, why don't you see the person standing in the corner? For some reason, as we get older, we feel like we shouldn't be talking like that. We shouldn't be bringing those things to anybody's attention. So we close these things we're experiencing off. And because of that, you get a lot of the plot points of what happens to this family individually. And each one is different. Each person goes through something completely different. And it's really bizarre. It's really out of this world. And it's very, very well written. I do appreciate this show for what it offers in the extent that it's a combination of two different things. And I've said this in videos on my YouTube channel. If you haven't seen that, go check that out. It's called If Flicks Could Talk. Flicks is spelled F-L-I-X. If Flicks Could Talk. I've mentioned it on there. I've probably mentioned it in some of the entries here. You might hear me talk about it a lot, but what I really like when certain stories and certain concepts come to light that are just very much out of the ordinary because it puts two things together that we haven't seen done before. And, of course, we've seen the haunted house. Of course, we've seen, racism in the 50s. But this puts those two things together. So it's like not only is this family dealing with the haunted house, dealing with the trauma that brings them to this area, but they're also dealing with a bunch of racist white people in the neighborhood. So it's just they're getting attacked from all angles. And it just kind of shows how they deal with it, how they cope with it, their strength through it, and it takes you on this journey of, not just discovery of a lot of the thing, how things were for black people in the 50s, but also what it would be like when that's not the only thing they have to worry about. Like, they're not just worrying about racist white people that want them out of the neighborhood. They also have like a demon coming after them, and then they have to deal with the guy's job where he's the only black person, and the girl's school and she's the only black student, and it's all these other things that are mangled together. And it's a very, very well done story, and I really appreciate when they put things together that have never been put together before, or at least in this light, in this I guess a sphere of storytelling, being this anthology-based television show. And something else I just saw as I'm looking at kind of the material that I have to talk about this season for them, it's just being promoted as them, but the actual name is Them Covenant. So that to me immediately strikes that they're going down the same path as American Horror Story. But I think the thing was that when American Horror Story first came about, the first season was called American Horror Story, then you had the second season, American Horror Story Asylum, then they gave the first season another nickname. I think they called it Murder House. But before that, it was just American Horror Story. This one, they're saying, bam, right off the bat, this is Them Covenant. So whatever the next thing is going to be, it's going to be a completely different story, probably doing the same kind of thing that the American Horror Story does, where they use the same actors and just have them in different roles, and the storyline is probably going to be, again, a mixture of this idea, these 2 or 3 things that we've never seen put together. And I think that's fantastic. I think this is a triumph for Amazon Originals. I do feel that this will go for just as long, if not maybe longer, than anything that they have on there right now. Like, they have a ton of shows right now. I don't know what the longest running right now is, but I remember looking into Amazon Original shows, and a lot of them you haven't heard about in a while. Like, I remember seeing Hunters. I don't know if you guys remember Hunters, but it was this show about Jews in the 70s hunting down Nazis in New York. And when you go and look up Amazon Originals, that show's nowhere to be found. And that was one of their big shows at the time. They were really promoting the heck out of that. I remember another big one when they were really, it was the birth of kind of Amazon Originals, Sneaky Pete. I haven't heard anything about that show in a couple of years. The only show they have that's been going for a while is The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and that's a fantastic show, and I think that's going into its 3rd or 4th season, but I think that's about it. I don't think they have anything that's past the 2nd season. I mean, not saying that there are things still filming right now, like they have The Boys Season 3 that's in the middle of filming. The Expanse, I heard, was really good, but I don't believe The Expanse actually started on Amazon. Amazon just kind of brought those rights over. But this is a really good frontrunner for an Amazon original that is in competition with something else that's outside of it, but could really go toe-to-toe with it. Like, once this gets up there in seasons and you start seeing more of how well they could probably do this show and what I'm expecting out of this show, being in that it's anthology-based like this, I'm expecting some really good things out of this, and I definitely think you should go and check it out if you haven't already. That's my recommendation. And I'm looking forward to what else they have to offer with this, because it's really, really good.